this is based around the fact that we have currently distributed this through Transition Marlborough about 800 packets of seeds, so wildflower and pollinator-friendly seeds. This started as a project based where I live in Mildenhall, and we were just going to deliver a packet of seeds to every house by way of trying to cheer things up a bit for when we come out of COVID. So we had something to look forward to. But the idea caught on, and so then we've ended up with these seeds going to Axford, out to Ramsbury, and of course this is Transition Marlborough as a project, so we couldn't not have seeds going out to Marlborough as well. So that's basically what this is about. For those of you who don't know, Transition Marlborough is part of a global network of community-based efforts, really initiatives to address these big issues around climate change and biodiversity loss and so forth, but in a way that brings communities together in activity that is hopefully fun and enjoyable to be part of. And one of the projects that we've been just kind of really sort of working away quietly on for the last sort of 2 or 3 years is this idea of bee roads. So joining up landscape in an effort to improve habitat for bees and other pollinators. So this is a really lovely example of creating a bee road, essentially from Marlborough to Ramsbury. It's turned into really quite a lovely idea. And one of the things that we've wanted to do with the bee roads is to join up with a national project which is called Bee Lines, which is run by a national charity called Bug Life. And I'll say a little bit more about that later, and I think Wendy's going to talk about that a bit in her presentation too. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to the lovely, lovely people who have given and donated and given us big discounts on their seeds for this project, and to Wendy, who is a garden designer and does a lot of work around wildflower gardens. So our first speaker will be Tim Evans, and he is our man from Meadow Mania. We'll then have Paul Jupp talking about Meadow in My Garden, and then Wendy will tell us a bit about from a garden designer's point of view around the wildflowers, and then I'll round up. So that's the proceedings really as we're gonna go. So I'll just without further ado, we'll hand over to Tim. Thank you very much.
Okay, am I on now?
You are on now, Tim. Yes.
Okay, I can just still see you, not me. But okay, well, as Millie said, my name's Tim Evans, and I run a business called Meadow Mania. And for over 20 years now, we've been supplying the UK market with native wildflower seeds, plug plants and bulbs. Most of our mixtures, as I said, are from UK native production, but we do also do a range now of non-native mixes as well. And what we've supplied to this sort of nice and exciting project is a wildflower meadow mix, which you can pretty much use over a very small area, about a square metre or so, just to give maybe a taster in the garden to sort of see how a meadow might establish. I thought I'd talk, before I talk about the mix, just about the preparation that you need to do for a meadow and the maintenance of it, and then explain a bit what's in our mix and how it might work. Wildflowers are very slow to grow, and they don't like much competition early on. Ideally, you'd aim in the spring to plant sort of mid-March through to the end of April in the case of our mix. What you want to try and do is, on the area you're going to plant, is just clear the ground completely of all the competition that you've got. There's only a small patch you're looking to do. And then you would broadcast the seed mixture that we've supplied over that area. Now, wildflower seed mixtures are set deliberately very low seed rates. You sow a lawn at about 40 grams per square metre. You're only sowing 4 grams to the square metre with a mixture like this. So what a lot of customers like to do is they bulk it up with some sand or something like that, simply so they can spread it thinly and evenly enough. And it's very simple and straightforward. When you've cleared the ground, you would just rake the area, broadcast the seed, and then walk all over it to push the seed into the ground so that it's not buried too deep, but it's at least under the surface. Once you have planted it, you shouldn't need to water the area, unless, of course, like last spring, it doesn't rain for about 3 months. But if it does that, you'll have to water it every day anyway. But generally, we say leave it alone. Now, lawns, as most of you probably experienced, will tend to come up quickly, evenly, without a problem. With wildflower meadows, they're very slow and very patchy to grow. So if you do plant our mixture, don't worry if it looks a bit worrying to begin with. What you will find is by the summer, you'll have things in flower that you can enjoy. But to begin with, it's going to look thin, it's going to look patchy, it's going to look like it's not working. What you then do is basically you leave it alone over the summer and you don't do anything with it until the autumn. And of course, this is one of the great things really in a way with a meadow, beyond the fact that it's incredibly beneficial to wildlife, to butterflies and bugs and various things, is that once you plant it, you don't have to keep cutting it, you can just stand back and enjoy it. And what you do then in the autumn, in early September, is cut the area down to a height of about 4 inches, leave what you've cut on the ground for a few days for the seed to shed, and then remove what you've cut. So we've got some notes that we can send, and if anyone contacts Millie, we've got some free little booklet that we're happy to email with you, setting all that out. But I just wanted to run through the sort of basic principles that, you know, that you would sort of follow. The mixture that we've supplied is what we'd call a meadow mixture, and this is a mixture of meadow grasses, non-competitive grasses, along with a perennial wildflowers. And most perennials are something you're probably familiar with, that once they're established, you cut them down and they'll grow back again. And there's a range in the mixture of about, I think, 18 different species, from campions and buttercups and things like that, which naturally appear with grasses as the backdrop. The issue with perennials is that they take 2 to 3 years to get fully established. So if you're not careful, you don't see a loss in the first year. So in this particular mix, what we've done is we've added a few annuals, things like poppies and cornflowers and corn marigold. And the idea with those is if you sow before the end of April, you should see a nice colourful show this summer from the annuals and be able to enjoy those. You'd then cut the meadow down, as I said, and then the perennials should start to come to the fore from the second year onwards, and they will then come back year after year. Now, I appreciate, obviously, this, it's a very small sample of seed, but it will give you a real opportunity to see what a meadow looks like, but also to work out how to establish one. And then obviously, if you like it, it's easy then to say, I know what to do now. Another year I can build on the back of that. As I said, we've got a free establishment booklet. We're very happy to email that. And the easiest thing probably, since you all probably know Millie, is you can either contact us direct or let Millie know your email and she can pass it on and we'll just email you a copy of that. But hopefully there's a bit of a rush through, but that gives you a bit of a background to what we've supplied, what to do with it and what's in it. Thank you very much.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Tim. There was a question, I think, from Kimmy about what is broadcasting. And a couple of us have said sort of scatter and sprinkle thinly, but do you want to expand on that at all? What would you?
No, I think that's exactly right. Yeah, scatter, it's exactly the same as you would do with lawn seed, in the sense you do it by hand. Broadcasting is just spreading the seed on the surface. The challenge, as I said, is that with grass seed, you're sowing 10 times as much. So it's very easy to sort of look at it and think this is a tiny amount of seed, but it's very much sprinkling on the surface, but try and bulk it up with some material such as sand so that you can make it go further and make it easier to spread. And then just walk all over it afterwards. So you push the seed into the ground.
That's lovely. And that's super. Thank you very much. Oh, I've muted myself. Sorry. I will answer Catherine Cook's question before I hand over to Paul as well. Thank you very much, Tim. That was really, really helpful.
Thank you.
So Catherine's asked a question about, you missed the beginning, how much do you supply and how much area will that cover? So Catherine, if you're in Mildenhall or Axford or Ramsbury, the seed you would have had was from Tim. And that was enough to do 1 square metre of meadow, so that includes grass seed. If you've got seed that's come from the Marlborough contingent, then that's come from Meadowmania, and that's Paul, who's our next speaker, and that's just flower seed. So that was actually enough to do 3 square metres. So just to let you know, but we'll hand over to Paul now, if that's okay, and he can tell us all about Meadowmania. Thanks very much.
Millie, just a small point. I'm meadow in my garden, but I'm quite happy to be confused.
I'm so sorry.
That's fine.
I apologise.
Good evening, everybody. If I could just tell you a little bit to start with about meadow in my garden. We started 10 years ago this month, and meadow in my garden are a community interest not-for-profit company. I started in 2010, having had a long career in the garden industry. And it was in that year that I read the Living Planet report, which highlighted that pretty much in the space of my, in my lifetime, the world had lost more than half its wildlife. And it was at that point that I really wanted to do the best I could to support biodiversity, primarily in gardens. So most of my work focuses on garden use in private gardens. And we have a very large range of dozens of different seed mixtures for every kind of garden setting. Broadly speaking, they're used in exactly the same way as Tim's mixtures. So in terms of getting the best results, you would clear an area, remove all grasses and vigorous vegetation, and create a fine tilth of soil into which to sow. And similarly, you would sow thinly across the surface of the soil and not rake in. It's best just to leave it on the surface and either roll or press into the soil. As I say, we have dozens of different mixtures, and whilst the methodology is important and the choice of seeds, the design element is really important. Just because it's a wild style of gardening doesn't mean that you can't integrate it into all sorts of interesting schemes. Within my range, there are mixtures that are very short, will only grow 20 centimeters or so in height. And there are mixtures for all kinds of gardens, whether it be shady under tree situations or in full sun. The focus on all the mixtures is biodiversity. The mixture that we've supplied, Millie, is our bees mixture. And the difference really is that every one of the species that are used in that mixture is there as a food source for bees, and not just honeybees. They're quite technical mixtures, so we're very interested in the needs of bumblebees, short-tongued and long-tongued and solitary bees. So we're focusing really on the longest possible flowering season to provide the best food source for bees. And all the beauty of it, which is a heavily multicolored mix of 27 different species, the beauty really is a byproduct. And the most important thing is that we are providing food source and habitat for pollinating insects. We do have in our range native wildflower mixtures, but most of what we do actually could broadly be called flower meadow creation, using garden plants that would be familiar to you as well as wild species. So we're more interested actually in providing that kind of wow factor that you get. Quite a lot of annuals, but then in most mixtures, the bees mixture we've provided is about 50-50 annual and perennial species. The quantity, I mean, really you need to just sow very thinly. The quantity we've supplied would cover about 3 square meters. So it can be used in a pot or a window box. You don't have to have a sizable garden. But if you have larger areas, the meadows make a real impact when they're sown in a large space where you can stand back and really get the full effect. That's me done, really.
Sorry, thanks, Paul. Thank you. I apologise for giving you the wrong organisation.
Not at all.
There are 2 questions that have come up here. One is from Linda and Ed, and they say, if we already have established grass or lawn, how much should we take off before broadcasting?
Yeah, so if you have a lawn and you envisage it being a wildflower meadow, the best thing to do might be to use a mixture of pure native wildflowers with no grasses. But it is quite difficult to establish wildflower in the grass. Grass is a bit of a thug and it will tend to win in the battle. So you have to always bear in mind that as a broad rule of thumb, you would be looking to remove 50% of the grass in order to actually be sowing into soil and not just on the surface. It does, I think, as Tim said, these meadows take time and they take patience. you're not going to get a wonderful profusion of colour in the very first season if you're taking that approach.
Okay. Sorry. And another question from Liz. Are there similar schemes in other areas? Liz is in Kent. So I'm guessing, I would probably say, Liz, see if there are other organisations, either seed suppliers, wildflower seed suppliers near you, just kind of have a quick Google. If there is a transition group near you, maybe something similar happening. But I think there are at the moment quite a lot of energy at the moment around things like tree planting, wildflower planting and so on. So I would be very hopeful that Kent has something to offer you. And if not, then I don't know, be inspired by this evening and start one, I think would be, would be my suggestion. And Linda's basically said, so if they scalp off about 2 centimetres, would that be okay? So that's going back to the idea of what should we take off the top before broadcasting.
The important thing is to remove the grass roots, which at 2 centimetres you're not going to. It doesn't need to be too much deeper than that, but you want to take out, I mean, the grass roots will grow laterally, so it's not a great depth, but at least sort of 7 or 8 centimetres to get the full turf out.
And then Kimmy has a question that she has sunflowers around the edge of her, the plot that she's going to be sowing her seeds in. Is that okay?
Well, it's no harm at all. And in fact, the mixture we've supplied does contain some sunflowers. If you have existing vegetation, it can provide a little bit too much, it can be too much going on. So when we supply a mixture, it's a very careful and painstaking design process. And anything that's already there might mess up that design process, but you can mix it all up. It's no problem at all.
Thanks, Paul. Okay, so without further ado, I will pass on to Wendy, who's going to give us a designer's eye on our topic for this evening. Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you, Millie. As a designer's eye really means I'll probably waffle on too long. So I've said to Millie, if anyone wants to ask a question as I'm going to share my screen with you, share a slideshow with you. So feel free to interrupt, but I won't be able to see you waving. So you can unmute yourself if you want to ask any questions, or just carry on putting them in the chat and we'll do them all at the end. So let me share my screen. And I know Liz, by the way, so I know that Kent is going to have its own wildflower initiative very shortly. If anyone can do it, Liz can. And let me present whole screen. Can everyone see that okay?
Yeah, that's fine, Wendy.
Marvelous.
Excellent, thank you.
Marvelous. So I'm going to talk about me because I'm a designer and that's what I do. But just to tell you how I got into wildflowers and loving biodiversity possibilities, I normally do rain gardens. So I'm a garden designer that specialises in rain gardens. And rain gardens are spaces that allow rainwater to come down from the roof and soak into the ground slowly. The idea behind them is that they can prevent flash flooding, they improve water quality, they reduce water quantity, they provide amenity, so they look nice, and they also provide biodiversity. And they fall into this thing called SUDS, which stands for Sustainable Drainage Systems. So those in Marlborough Permaculture Group will have had a talk already, but this talk is not about rain gardens. That's for another day. It's about the elements of biodiversity that I love using in the rain gardens, but also how you can use all of that, tips and tricks really, in your own gardens to make these little wildflower meadows really sing and really thrive and look good. So you'll see, these are a couple of local schools, but you'll see on the right there, you've got lots of oxeye daisies in a wildflower patch. And all these gardens I do, by the way, with Action for the River Kennet, who are a Rivers Trust, and they are well worth following, and they do great work in the area. So now my screen, of course, doesn't want to go forwards. There we go, going back one. This was the screenshot on the front of my presentation. And as Paul was just saying, there are different types of meadow, and this is more of a managed kind of garden meadow, very little grass. There'd be a mixture of native and non-native flowers in there, and sort of just wildflower seeds really. And so this might be, if you're lucky, what you end up with by sowing Paul's mix. And what Tim has supplied, with a few bonus annuals thrown in, is more of a meadow mix. So it's a chalk grassland wildflower meadow mix. So it does have grass seed in as well. And both can look absolutely beautiful in a garden, and both are essentially the same management. I hope that you're all here because you know about climate change and you'd really like to do your bit towards improving the environment for our insect pollinators. It's all very well to say climate change. One statistic that really hits home for me is the fact that by 2050, which is only 30 years away, the climate in London will be the same as the climate in Barcelona now. And that's going to happen regardless of whatever we do. And I think it's really important to sort of be informed when we're deciding whether we're going to put native or non-native species in our garden. There are lots of believers that one approach might be better than the other. And I would sort of say there are many factors in what's going to happen in the environment, and some of our native species are not going to thrive in these warmer conditions, and we may find them moving northwards. And that includes birch and oak and cranesbill and devil's bit scabious. And if you want to read more about the effect climate will have on our wildflowers, look up a guy called James Hitchmo at Sheffield University. They've done a lot of research on how climate will affect what grows where. And it's certainly something to think about when we're planting in our gardens. I won't go through all this in detail because I will be here all night, but another thing to take a look at is genetic diversity. So we could all source our seed from one supplier, and that seed would have been commercially produced and to all flower at the same time. Whereas within that species, there is going to be much genetic diversity, and perhaps the one that's not in that commercial mix might be the one that survives at these new higher temperatures. So we need to find ways as well of sourcing seed from existing meadows, such as the Norfolk Wildlife Trust are doing in their areas. You'll see a charity called Plant Life who are harvesting hay from existing meadows and then spreading the hay on new areas. And these are all ways of ensuring that the seed bank really remains diverse. And I know that R2 seed suppliers also source their seed from various places. So that is a good thing. And then another element really to the native and non-native plant debate is that research University of Sussex, some pollinators, so some insects, some solitary bees, some bees, they are just not that fussy whether their pollen is from native or non-native plants. But there are some species that are much more specific. So a butterfly, for instance, might have more of a relationship with a certain species that means it's not only a food source, but it's also somewhere for that butterfly to overwinter. So there are all these relationships going on, which provide us with this huge biodiverse network of things in our garden. Sorry, my computer's very slow and it won't move on to a more interesting slide. There we are. So this is the butterfly conservation, saying this very briefly, and I couldn't say it better than this. I want to talk to you a bit about soil, because I think there's a big misconception really that as a gardener, we need to improve our soil, we need to increase the fertility of our soil in order to make things grow. And you might be tempted to mix compost into the area where you're going to sow your wildflowers, or even dig in manure because you think that they'll grow better. But a lot of wildflower meadows fail because the soil is too nutrient rich. So I think one thing to consider when you're planting is a different approach. Actually, wildflowers will thrive in incredibly low nutrient soil and in subsoil. And just to kind of show you really this different way of thinking, these pictures were taken at a friend of mine's garden. If you look up grassroofcompany.co.uk, they specialise in sort of brownfield gardens, which means that these building materials are heaped up and used as substrates to plant in. And you can see what an incredibly diverse mix of plants you can get growing in these conditions. And I just wanted to show you, because our default as gardeners is topsoil and nutrients. And actually what the wildflowers want is low nutrient and well drained. I'm not saying every wildflower does that. You know, as Tim and Paul have said, there are different mixes for different situations. But it's just to sort of broaden our thinking. You know, you can plant things in crushed concrete. So John here uses a sort of 20 mil no fines crushed concrete, and things will grow quite happily in that, especially our chalk grassland wildflowers, because it's the kind of right pH for them to thrive. I've put building sand there because piles of building sand are fantastic habitat for bees, for ground nesting bees. So not all bees love nesting in holes, some of them dig holes in this. So to include, you know, different depths of this and different areas of this in your planting means that overall you'll end up with a much more biodiverse mix of flowers. So don't think that you need to have high nutrient soil. These little mounds of thyme, bottom left, they're growing in this sort of 50 mil crushed brick and concrete, and they're thriving. I can never get thyme to look that healthy in my herb garden, but it's because they don't need any nutrients. So, and this is a brownfield garden that was done at Hampton Court. So this kind of approach to letting the substrate and the soil inform what grows is a big talking point at the moment within design, and it's something to be aware of in your garden, especially if you've got an old pile of rubble and you want to get rid of it. Well, maybe don't get rid of it, incorporate it into your planting areas and see what grows. So another way of getting a wildflower meadow is to join in with Plant Life's No Mow May initiative, which you've probably seen a lot last year, where you just don't mow for the months of May. It's brilliant. You can put your feet up and have a rest and see what grows in your garden. And their surveys, which you can also complete, having taken part in this, show that you know, nectar is increased tenfold by just not mowing for a month. So this is a really important way of getting a food source for bees, and it just involves doing nothing to your garden. Then we have got a very slow slide coming along. There we go. Another way of getting instant meadow is, I'm sure you've heard of ready grown wildflower turf or wildflower mat. This is possible. You know, you can get this on a roll like you do normal turf, but I'm going to give a caveat here. If you look top left, before buying, you must check that the product you're buying, it does not have plastic in it. Now, I was really shocked when I found out that some wildflower turf is supplied with a plastic mesh running through it, because it makes lifting and rolling the turf cheaper and easier. So, you know, you could unwittingly be laying a sheet of plastic over your garden. So it's really important as consumers we check first whether that's the case. It's not always obvious from the website. So my sort of recommended supplier is sort of bottom left there, which is Lindum Turf, who are a brilliant supplier, and there's no plastic in their wildflower mat or their turf. So I recommend them. We've talked a bit about Plant Life. They've got loads of great advice on their website about wildflower gardens. So do have a look at that link. There's more on there than we can ever cover tonight. And also, I'm going to just highlight green roofs here, because perhaps you've got a pet hutch or a kennel or a bin store. And if you're interested in a great place to put wildflowers on a thin, shallow substrate, well, green roofs are something you could investigate further. I won't talk much about this because Tim and Paul have done a brilliant job. I would say that when you mix your seed with sand, make sure it's really dry sand, like super dry, fine sand, because, you know, I've had people that have mixed their seed with sand, except the sand was a bit damp. So what they've ended up doing is sowing all the seed in one big blob because it's stuck together. So do make sure the sand is super dry, and then you can see where the sand has landed that you've got an even covering of seed. And then I've just put my big sign because, you know, we're doing all this good for insects and pollinators. So, and this is in our garden, and we have a choice in our garden not to use pesticides. And if we're going to the effort of planting these nectar sources and habitat, let's try and stop using pesticides in our garden as well. I just think it makes complete sense. We have choice, you know, we don't, not everyone can kind of make that choice. They don't have an outside space, but where you possibly can, try and avoid pesticides, and also ask if the bulbs have been grown using pesticides or the seed has been sourced using that. And let's try and move away from this thing that harms our wildlife. And I'm gonna, come on, next slide, come on. It serves me right for putting too many pictures in now, it doesn't want to go. There we go. So I wanted to say here, cutting back the meadow, you could do it end of July, because that would be a traditional time to cut meadow hay, but that's only done because there's more grass at that time of year. So gardens and public space we usually cut in September, and then let the cuttings lie and then remove them, as Tim said. But if we're thinking about wildlife and what else might use that area, especially butterflies, then if we can leave cutting back till even later, till sort of March time, we're giving somewhere for things to overwinter as well. So the little orange tip butterfly chrysalis top right there, and that overwinters on garlic mustard, and the chrysalis sort of changes colour as the plant dies back. So these things are really valuable to leave standing over winter as well. And it also gives you a little bit of winter structure. Otherwise, what happens in winter is that we get these sort of, hang on, go back, we get this, which is sort of, there's nothing really to look at. It looks nice because of the snow. So you can add structure in other ways to your wildflower area. We've seen bee posts. You can spend a lot of money on bee posts. The ones on the left are very lovely, but very expensive. Or you can take a piece of wood from your own garden and drill your own artistic holes in that section in the middle there. And 4 to 10 mil size holes is ideal for solitary bees. And the bee post on the right is a little bit unusual, again from Grass Roof Company. It's a metal tube with holes in, but it's filled with sand, so that bees that nest in horizontal sand can go in there. Log piles are a fantastic way of adding structure to a winter garden. They're cheap, they're free. You can get a sculptural, can't say it, as you like with these. And again, have a look at Nigel Dunnett's Instagram or Facebook, because he's done a lot of this. And I think they look effective at any time of year. And also walls. So the wall on the left is one I did. It's out of bits of broken paving. So they weren't any use, they were free. And you can, you know, make some little sculptures of your own. Stacked up roof tile slate is really good. And then there's these things which I should mention, which are gabions. Not everyone has heard of gabions, but they come flat packed. They're small garden size ones. The massive ones are used to retain motorway embankment soil, but you can get them in a kind of garden scale and fill these up with any rubble or brick or flint or any stone that you've got lying around. To save taking it away, you can fill up these cubes with it and then make them into seats. There's also roof tiles, look, and clay pipes in that one. And they make great habitat as well for the larger invertebrates and spiders in the garden. So they're a really good biodiverse garden feature to include. Also think about putting maybe stepping stones through your wildflower area. It's a brilliant thing to get children interacting close up with wildflowers, and maybe include a little den somewhere within the wildflower area, or a seat as well. So these are all easy fixes. And then, you know, some people, if you get a nosebleed by looking at the untidiness of wildflowers, a really simple, easy thing to do is to mow a path through them. And you've kind of given it structure, you've given it that neat edge that makes it acceptable. And I think this is probably especially important in a front garden, because you want people to love what you're doing. So if you can make it look stylish and intended, then that is a really big step to that as well. So there's two ways of doing that in the middle, with a product called Everedge. You don't pay me, but it's strips of steel with spikes in the bottom, and you can use that to hammer in and make a neat edge. But I've just used woven hazel at the bottom there to define an edge. And then interpretation boards, if you are doing something in a public area, again, help inform people what you're doing. Nearly at the end, I just wanted to show you some of my absolute favourite wildflowers, because you could supplement your mixes by buying sort of extras just of the wildflower seed of these and adding them as well. So these are perennials. This is wild carrot, and you can identify a wild carrot because of that little red dot in the middle of it. And that's also attracted this red soldier beetle. Perhaps it thinks that there's another red soldier beetle on the flower. But I mean, red soldier beetles are brilliant. They eat aphids, so they'll look after the roses. So there's all these relationships going on. And these seed heads look wonderful in winter as well. And then oregano, the marjoram, is a favourite of, I'm going to mention Dave Goulson, who writes some fantastic books about wildflowers, but mostly about bees. And if you haven't read them, you should. Absolutely inspirational. And then we've got a couple here, fennel. According to the ecologist that works for Grass Roof Company, fennel is one of the best plants to attract all sorts of invertebrates and insects and pollinators. And the sound from it in the summer of the buzzing of solitary bees is amazing. And then my favourite in my garden here is Viper's bugloss, which is the tall blue towers. Again, I've never stood next to a wildflower area and been so bowled over by the noise and the activity of the insect pollinators around those flowers. And then you might have a tricky area in your garden, and that's fine. They're not tricky areas. Keep a small patch of nettles. They're really good for small tortoiseshell, peacock butterflies. I've sort of listed a few there. We can probably put these on a handout as well, if Millie's up for that. You can plant toad flax in with nettles. They love the same nitrogen-rich soils. So your wildflower mix probably isn't going to like where the nettle's growing, but there are lots of other things that will, that are really useful for wildlife. Wildlifetrusts.org have a brilliant database of wildflowers, and it also tells you which insects or invertebrates are associated with each wildflower. So it's really useful to know, and you can start to spot them in your garden. Quick mention about rain gardens again. If you want to know more about rain gardens, there's a rain garden guide at raingardens.info. And shortly, with Action for the River Kennet, we will have produced some rain garden training courses as well. If you're interested in that, watch this space. And then I said to Millie, I was going to finish on this slide. So Bug Life is the only charity in the UK that is out there for invertebrates. So they're really important to support. These are the guys that will lobby the government on our behalf to protect our invertebrate and insect populations. And they, I've only shown the south of England here, but their networks cover the whole of the UK. So they've got an interactive map. You can go on, look in your local area. And also, if you do create a little wildflower area, add it to this map so that they know what we're up to. And they also, various other initiatives you can join in. So I'll let you have a look at their website. But I mean, overall, for me to wrap up, we are living in quite gloomy times. It is the 6th mass extinction, but a lot of what we're doing now is not about doing, it's about undoing, and it's about doing less in our gardens. It's not about mowing, it's not about pesticides, and it's not about lots of maintenance. Doing less of all those things is going to result in more habitat and more pollen, which gives us more insects, more invertebrates, and more pollinators, which is, let's face it, what we're all hopefully here to achieve. And these little, 1 metre square packets have a teaspoon of seed in each. You might think, well, that won't make much difference, but there's 1,000 square metres of this seed that's been distributed in the area. So it does make a difference, and hopefully within your garden, that will also spread. So I think it's a really nice positive way to feel that your garden is yours and you're using it to good effect to really make a great difference. So thank you for listening to my waffle. I'm going to hand you back to Millie now, hopefully by stopping sharing my screen. There we go.
Oh my word. That was tremendous, Wendy. I know if people want to applaud or just kind of wave here. That was absolutely amazing. Thank you. And I was really moved actually by listening to what you were saying, and those beautiful photographs that you shared with us. I think that's really inspiring. And there is something about this, we're so often kind of overwhelmed, I think, by how our little bit that we can do seems to not make a difference, but actually I'm looking at all of your pictures on the screen now and knowing that 800 packets of seeds have been distributed, and actually if they do all get sown, it's 1,000 square meters of those beautiful things that that Paul and Tim have talked about and that Wendy's shown us pictures of. So I do feel really quite moved to think about what we might have started here. And I think this was also about starting a conversation, was about, you know, because it's certainly in Mildenhall and Axford, every house in these villages has had a packet of seeds put through the letterbox. And so it's a reason for us to talk to each other about plants and about what we're doing with our gardens and so on. And I think that's really important. So I'm just going to have a couple of minutes of just saying to you about other ways that you can get involved. So first off, if you've got a packet of these seeds, please sow them. If you don't have an opportunity to do that in your own space, then please give them to your neighbours and have a conversation about wildflowers. If you are not already connected with or aware of Transition Marlborough, then please go and have a look on our website or our Facebook page. We also have another page that's associated, which is the B Roadzz. That's roads with 2 Z's. So do come and have a look. I think following this, I'll post up some kind of follow-up information really from this evening on those sites. We also run a permaculture course through Transition that's starting in March. Permaculture is essentially a design system, learning from nature. How would nature do things? Applying the way that nature designs to the way we do things as people. Gerald is here if he wants to give us a quick wave. And Debs as well are 2 of our facilitators on that course. Rachel Rosedale also hosts some of those sessions. So the permaculture course is there. And that thing about the map that Wendy put up at the end around bug life, if you look at that map closely, you will see that Marlborough is on a crossroads of 2 of those recommended routes through the country. We are in an absolutely perfect position. So going north, south, east, west from Marlborough to make a massive contribution to a national and actually, you know, a global effort to do something. So don't imagine that your little packet of seeds doesn't mean anything, because it does. So that's really pretty much all I was going to say, I think. We will follow up. Please, however you found out about this evening, just reply to that source if you would like to know more. I'm sure we'll be able to share Wendy's slides.
Yes, absolutely. I'll be happy to do that.
And Rich has just put a little poll up for us now, just to, if you can click on those things. If this has been helpful, I think we can do similar events around these subjects or other ones in the future. And I just want to thank you all so much for coming this evening and paying attention and listening.
Yeah, so
share one more thing before we go.
Yeah, sure.
I'm sorry, Richard, to interrupt. I didn't realise you were going to start speaking then.
Well, I'm just going to say this was 100% successful. Everyone wants to see more of this. So thank you to our presenters, because they've done a brilliant job tonight.
Thank you. There's one more slide I'm going to show you, if that's all right, which is an initiative we're doing in Marlborough. So it's very visible from the A4. Is that all right, Millie?
Yes.
It's this one here. So at 64 London Road, and it's on the bank that slopes down to the A4 just after the hospital going down the hill. So a couple of people, I think it was Ed and Linda, were asking about how much soil you take off. Well, we've done both here. We've attacked the turf, the existing turf, and totally wrecked it, but we've also dug out a big strip through the middle to remove the roots as well. And we've put a strip of dug chalks as a substrate through that. So that's for decorative effect, but we've also sown yellow rattle around in the grass and around the edge of that chalk strip. And we've also sown chalk grassland wildflower perennial seeds in there as well. So over the next few years, hopefully that will start to take shape, and it's part of the Blue Heart campaign as well for rewilding. So that's another one to be aware of. So I'm sorry to leap back in with that, but I've just realised it's kind of local relevance that people might want to see. It's part of Millie's B Roads project as well, and the bug lines. sorry, bug life beelines. So it's
Thank you,
just
Wendy.
worth showing you that before we go. But thank you so much, everybody.
There was a question also, sorry, from Kimmy about whether councils are getting involved, and the answer, I think fairly resoundingly, is that yes, certainly Marlborough Town Council is getting involved, and parish councils also were really supportive of these things. So yeah, just keep in touch with us, you know, in whatever guise that works for you. And yeah, sow your seeds and send us pictures and show us what happens. And yeah, awesome. Thank you very much for coming.
Okie dokie.
We'll see you again.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you out and about soon, we hope.
Thank you, Millie.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Millie.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Thank
Thank you.